Hey guys, welcome back to the GM's Table. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody like, share, subscribe, do all that great YouTube stuff. Check out the Patreon below because especially for this series, within the next day or two, actually by the time this is up, all 5 episodes in the first part of this game prep series will be on the Patreon. Anyways, moving on from that. Last week we did part 1. I'm going to try and throw a tag up there where we talked about what to do before you even do session 0. Now, I'm not going into session 1 just yet. As I said last episode, we're going into what you do after session 1. Why? Because this is a big picture thing. I want to cover the big picture and my mentality of how I run sessions and kind of format campaigns before we go into the deeper nitty-gritty so you have an idea of it. So, with that, how do I handle it? Well, first and foremost, I want to say plainly, I have a degree in film and television writing. I tend to look at things from a script concept and from a TV mentality because that's where my career focus was before I became a dad. And I look at gaming as seasons with episodes. That's how I tend to run my campaigns. Now, that's not saying like a full open-ended sandbox doesn't work. I've run those. I enjoy those. And one-shots or very compressed campaigns work, and I run those. But I've found, especially through my experience GMing over the years, that I prefer seasons with episodes within the seasons, and then at the end of the season, we can go into a new season or go somewhere else and come back to a season and stuff like that. It's this good mix of episodes campaigns feeling like they have endpoints, but can potentially keep going. Now, why seasons? Why episodes beyond that? Well, the episodic season, specifically, the main format that through trial and error works best is, for lack of a better word, a lot of people call it the big bad or the Whedon formula, because until he did it with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it wasn't really done. Since Buffy, lots of shows have done it. I mean, most of your Whedon shows have done it. Supernatural, a lot of your episodic shows do it now, where you have episodes. You have an arc that lasts all season. You might have a bigger arc that lasts the whole series, but there's an arc that ends by the end of the season. And you have episodes within that season. Not every episode ties to the arc. You have callbacks to the arc. And you do have some episodes that are very directly related to it, but not all of them. This works great for tabletop gaming. In fact, it's very, very close. I wouldn't be surprised if it's where they got the idea on how to format it that Savage Worlds uses for many of their plot point campaigns. Because while this series is system neutral, I'm trying to do it in a way where anyone running any game can use this. Savage Worlds kind of already does a lot of this with the plot points, because if you're not familiar with them, their campaigns tend to be plot point campaigns, especially if they're from first party. From Pinnacle, they're all plot point campaigns. And how those are is you have a certain number of plot point adventures that happen each rank, and a rank is about 4 advances. Those adventures are tied specifically to the main campaign. They're written and designed in a way where they don't have to happen right after each other. They don't have to happen after a set amount of time. You can kind of have a plot point adventure. Your players can go off, do whatever they want, and eventually you pull the game back towards another plot point adventure, and it calls back to the main campaign. That's how theirs is designed. It gives a lot more freedom as a GM. That's very much how I design my games. So with that, I want to talk about episodic adventures and then seasons. And seasons isn't as long of a thing because some of the special stuff in seasons will have their own episodes. I'm going to get to that. But first, an episodic adventure. What is special about this versus other adventures? First and foremost, it used to be a rule in episodic television, specifically syndicated, where there was this phrase, always end where you began. And you see this a lot with older television, where by the end of the episode, everybody's right back where they are. They're right back to the status quo. This existed because they wanted shows, specifically syndicated shows, that could be aired out of order or aired in odd time slots where people could be jumping at any point, to be written in a way where you can watch them in any order and it still makes sense. Or just about. Sometimes, as things grew and evolved, you'd eventually have shows where they would have basically milestones. Like the show was, you can notice the difference between before this point and after this point. And typically this was inclusion of new characters, things like that. But for the most part, the writing was designed to try and end where you started as much as possible. I'm not going to say go that far, because also writing has evolved since then. But try and end in the same vicinity as where you started. Things like home bases, hometowns, even a tavern where you collect your adventurers together work really well for this. Now, you might be asking, why? Well, if you can end your adventures at least within a region where it would make sense for players who may have left to be back, it really, really helps if your table becomes inconsistent. If you have all 5 of your players there for episode 1, and it ends at the same tavern or in the same town or the same keep as it began, you're fine. Now, episode 1s are slightly different. We're going to get into that because since they kick off this arc, they can go wherever and then you move from there. But if it all ends in the same place where it started, you know all the adventures will begin and end, say, in or around a keep. And that's kind of where our downtime area is. Then if in episode 2, if 1 or 2 players don't show up, that's fine. You have episode 2, and the players who are there play, and it still ends in or around the keep. So in episode 3, if those players come back, and maybe even one of the other players can't make it this time, it's fine. Because since everything's going around the keep, you know this is where everyone's meeting. This is where everyone gets together. Well, why aren't they here this time? They're off doing other adventures. They're off doing side goals and side tracks. They're out of town. But you know the next time you're at the keep, the beginning of the next adventure, they could be back. And that is how players come back. You don't have to twist the narrative and make up weird excuses for people to vanish or reappear. Now, when we get into cliffhangers and stuff much later on, into the more advanced writing of it, not this episode, it gets even trickier because anytime an episode lasts more than one session, you have the same issue if you want everyone to try and be there. And sometimes that can't happen, and that's where you got to start twisting. But as long as everyone stays consistent within an episode, it all works, and it works much better. It works much easier, I should say. I don't want to say better, because there's different, but it makes things easier for the GM. Now, the episode itself has a few components, and how you handle these components can be done different ways, but one of the key things of an episodic adventure is keep it simple. Keep the plot simple, because again, ideally, most of your episodes only last one session before things come around. You can have plot threads left open, and those are your arcs, but your main conflict, your main goal, you want to try and set up in a way that only takes about a session to complete. This means you really only need 2 elements in the adventure. You need a MacGuffin, which is whatever the adventure's hung up on. It can be an item, it can be a person, it can be a spell. It's something either the players are trying to get, trying to steal, trying to save, maybe something the villain has, maybe something the villain wants and the players need to get to beforehand. Doesn't really matter. Especially in writing terms, a MacGuffin is literally the item that exists only for the story. Now, you can make your MacGuffins more important, and you can take the time to work them and thread them back into other adventures when we start weaving adventures together. But within the structure of it being episodic, you just need a MacGuffin. You need a thing that is a good focus for your party. The other item you need is a foe, an adversary, an antagonist. And the antagonist has 2 parts. The antagonist has a plot, and the antagonist has a motive. You need both of these. You do not want an antagonist that has a plot, but you don't know his motives. And you don't want an antagonist that you know all his motives, but you haven't figured out his plot. The antagonist needs both of these before you go and sit at the table as a DM. Why? Well, first and foremost, you want the plot. You want to figure out what the antagonist plans to do. That, in a lot of ways, is the structure of the adventure. It's what's happening. It's not always happening where the adventurers are or where the party is, especially if they go and they divert. It's a really, really good way if you have a party that likes to ignore quests or ignore leads, because if you have their initial plot, always assume if the players don't get involved, the plot goes according to plan. The only people that can screw up the antagonist's plot are the players at your table. Now, if the players go, interact with NPCs, and send NPCs on a course to screw with it, that's still the player's involvement. But that's very, very important, because you just need your players to ignore one thing, and they see it play out, and then they realize if they don't do things about stuff they hear about, they actually happen. They're not these quest bubbles above NPCs that sit there forever until the players go, okay, we're done with our side stuff, now we're going to go pick up. No, this is stuff that's happening and it's moving. You don't need super in-depth timelines. Typically, especially for an episode, have 4 to 5 things in the plot, tops. 5 tops, if you're not counting the and he succeeds. Because that's all you need. We're talking about one thing. We're not talking about the big arc, the big season long. This was one episode, so it should be pretty simple. The motive, however, is the most important part. The plot is the skeleton. It is what the whole adventure hangs on. However, the plot, as if the players get involved, the plot will be foiled or will be stopped. Roadblocks will be put up. Knowing the antagonist's motive, and I tend to count the means the antagonist has, any resources he has, stuff like that, within the motive. Because the antagonist can allocate those means and he can shift them around, which means it falls more under motive than plot to me. Because party went, they stopped this plot. They saw it coming, they found a way to head off the antagonist. Maybe the antagonist is looking to get a magic relic, and the party goes and they steal the relic ahead of time. Now that can be a whole episode if you can stretch out, but maybe they get clever and they figure out how to steal it in the first scene. Okay, well, the antagonist still wants that relic. That's their motive, is the relic. So now you get to go, well, how will the antagonist try to get the relic from the party? Because now the party has it. The antagonist still has the motive of steal the relic. Now it's not steal the relic from the museum, it's steal the relic from the party. And odds are the antagonist might still try to steal the relic from the museum if they don't know it's gone. So the break-in still happens, they find out it's gone. Then they have to figure out where the relic is their next plan. And once they figure out where the relic is, or if the players take time to try and hide and screw that up, which really just slows it down, they just figure out new ways to find it. The antagonist now thing is find the relic, because he no longer knows where it is. Once it's found, it's steal the relic. Because the motive is get the relic. That doesn't change no matter what the players do. That very much helps, and it keeps adventures from feeling like they're on rails, but still keeps them simple enough that you can hopefully wrap them up in about one session. Now, those are not the only parts of episodic content. There are typically 2 other pieces, but they're not as integral. First is the hook. Episodic content is about being able to do it somewhat quickly. We're trying to get an adventure done in a session. That means we want to pick up the adventure quickly, and we want to get the players on board. Now, as I said, we have a lot of stuff planned, so the players aren't on rails. However, they do still have to pick up the adventure. Now, there's a few ways to do this. First of all, you can talk to your players and just basically be like, look, when I give out a hook, you guys as adventurers and as heroes and as the leads in the story, part of it is that at least one of you needs to be trying to pick up the hook. If someone else doesn't agree with it, the conflict can happen, but we still have to move towards the hook. We're heading for that. Eventually, we'll get into the complete bottle episodes or side adventures where really you can have an entire adventure of shopping. But when we're talking about the typical adventure, the one where things happen, and people are proactive, someone picks up the hook. Now, there's also a few other ways to handle this. You can give your players multiple hooks. If you do that in the adventure, you have to be ready to run any of them. Now, you can have multiple hooks that lead to the same foe and the same MacGuffin from different sources. That works. You can also use that time between sessions, either at the end of last session or even we finished the session, we got a whole week, maybe you're still in contact with your players and you're just like, look, here's the hooks for next session. Which ones are you guys interested in so we can figure out which one we're going to play next week? Yes, it's outside of game, but by doing it that way, we can go and agree, be like, which of these adventures sound interesting? All right, we've agreed this is the adventure we want to take. If the party agrees to that, and we get there at the table, and say we agreed to it 2 days ago, we get there at the table, and Steve goes, oh, I've changed my mind. Steve's being a dick, and Steve is trying to derail the table. This is why it's about agreeing to it and giving the option. If you had a problem with it, that's fine. You bring it up before we're at the table. At the table, we want to move things along. It's not about forcing you to go. It's more, you said you wanted to do this. People put the work in to do it. So come on, man. We're playing a game. There are some expectations. Just like you watch a show and you know, all right, this is probably going to happen because we're watching this show. It's one of the things about episodic content, but it does clean it up a lot. The final piece is this is a piece that's much harder to do. I'm going to fully admit. And it's the climax. I'm going to do an entire episode on climaxes, because you want to have an idea for how you would like the session to end so it can be dramatic. Something big, to be punchy, to feel like the adventure has ended, or if you're doing a two-parter, for the cliffhanger. However, you can write a climax in advance, and just like with the plot, the players can completely derail it. And it takes practice and honestly just time and experience to learn how to take an idea for a climax and then leave it open enough to mutate it to fit wherever it may go. That's why it's going to have its own thing. But we have a hook, we have a foe, we have a MacGuffin, and we have a climax. That is everything you need in your episode. The rest, it's kind of up in the air. Locations, having a stable of locations, just like we talked about a stable of enemies in episode 1, does help. Have a few key ones. Typically a location for your hook, a location for your climax, and 2 to 3 other fun, interesting locations. The rest can be like, well, where are you guys going? Okay, then you're there. Then you go there and we figure it out as we go. Well, who do they face? That's what your stable's for from, again, episode 1. You have ideally already made this small stable of commonly faced foes. If you want someone special for them to face that isn't the antagonist, because remember, you also have your antagonist ideally. Like maybe a second in command or maybe the antagonist is a scientist, but he has a monster. Feel free to have that one, but honestly, try to keep it to no more than 2, like, really custom enemies. The rest can be fodder. Now, that doesn't mean you can't give them interesting descriptions. One of the examples I said is putting bandits in your stable. Bandits are great because they're just aggressive humanoids that the party can face that are looking to take, steal, or be violent. Like, anything. You take the bandit stats, and then you go, alright, let's flavor it to what's going on. But the actual stats, you don't need custom stats for every little thing. That's what your stable's there for. It's to keep things quick. And that way, if they change their mind and go somewhere else, first of all, those bandit stats can be used in multiple places, so you don't need it. But you also have your wolves, your goblins, your orcs for big toughs. And you have those at the ready to go. And this does take some practice again. Almost everything of GMing is a mix of art and prep. You have to be fluid with it. So there does come points where you're like, what would be interesting here? What could they face here? Again, this also helps with going back to that foe's plot. The plot, as well as the resources and stuff, will help inform you enemies. We're not looking to specifically build encounters for every scene. That's not the route we go here. Instead, we build up a plot that they fall into, looking at the foe, what would he throw, and you're done. It keeps it quick. It keeps it quick and fast. It keeps it quick. It keeps it simple. And you get to go boom, 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 have some fun, and then we're out of here and we're ready for the next adventure. So, with episodes out of the way, I also want to talk a little bit about seasons as a whole. I tend to, for RPGs, I've looked at different numbers of stuff. What tends to work is about a 13 episode season. TV is 13 episodes, 22 episodes. Sometimes you get 8 episode runs, but those are more or less the standard numbers. Now, the first episode of your first season is a pilot. That is next episode here. Pilots are a very unique situation. That's why I'm going to do a whole episode about them. However, later seasons, as well as a bit of the pilot, but like I said, pilots are a little different. You start with your episode that hooks for the arc. And we know the season's going to end with an adventure that has the climax of the big arc. You want to try and keep the season arc kind of just out of reach of the players. That way you can make it last all season. In between that, those are 2 episodes. You still have 11 adventures. About 3, maybe 4 for 13, maybe 4 more adventures can directly involve, reference, or be tied to that big arc. Now, it does take some practice in writing in ways that by defeating this adventure should not end the arc. Now, players might get creative and find ways to do that to bring themselves as close to the arc as possible. So we gotta treat arcs similar to the plots with a foe. In fact, they really are the whole antagonist with motive that has a plot that needs to warp on a much bigger scale, on a 13 adventure scale. But you have your opening, you have your closing, you have, we'll say, 3 in the middle. There are 5 adventures where it really matters. Those are the ones you pay attention to. And those are typically, really what it is the foe is either the big bad or someone who works for the big bad. The MacGuffin is tied to this arc, and you just have references to whatever the ending thing is. Maybe it's the big bad's trying to take over the world. Maybe it's the apocalypse is coming. Whatever you want your big bad climax to be. Climaxes both on the small and large scale. Like I said, climaxes are going to have their own because they very much matter narratively. But have an idea for a climax. And the whole final adventure for the season is like a climax adventure. It should be your big balls out, just go for it. Everything in between those 5 adventures can be anything the players want. And that's what's great. If you want to go, well, but what if my players want to leave town? What if they want to go explore somewhere else? What if they just want to spend a session shopping and we have interesting RP? You have it. And again, similar to those plot point situations, you can write your bigger plot point adventures in ways where they don't have to be right next to each other or only 1 episode apart from each other. They can go and spread out. So unless we're talking 5 episodes, that leaves 8 open. So unless they're doing more than 8 episodes of nothing, you're going to have time to still get your big arc in. So again, this wasn't a lot of specifics, but I wanted to cover the broad strokes before we got in deep, because this is the mentality how I take to campaigns and how I take to episodes. And that structure is going to inform a lot of my tips beyond here. If this isn't how you run your games, that is fine. This isn't the only way I've ever run games, but through trial and error, it's my preferred way. If you've never run it this way, give it a shot. You're going to find a lot of advantages to this, and it's going to make the GM's job a lot easier. Anyways, I will catch you guys next time. Bye. If you like that video, check out another video over here. Whatever it is, it's probably pretty good. Don't forget to like, share so other people can find the channel, and subscribe right up there. YouTube now won't let me put a link to the Patreon, but there is a link down in the description below. So if you want to help support the channel, check that out, and I will catch you guys next time.